Okay, we're going to talk about the Persians and the Assyrians now. We've been talking about River Valley civilizations and the birth and development of civilization, and now we're going to start to see um, those civilizations expand and become more advanced. And we're going to talk about the Assyrians, who were occupants of northern Mesopotamia, and we're going to talk about the Persians, who had a very vast empire across the different River Valley civilizations that we've been talking about. Let's talk about the Assyrians first. The Assyrians were a group of very warlike people who come from the northern Mesopotamia, and like we talked about in class, the Assyrians were actually very warlike because they didn't have natural barriers. We talked about how Mesopotamia as a whole, as you can see, does not have any kind of natural geographical barriers to keep invasion out. So the Assyrians were able to build their warlike behavior from their surroundings, and as we'll see, that becomes very characteristic of their entire people. They are able to eventually build an empire that stretches northeast of the Tigris River all the way down into Egypt. So the Assyrians are able to conquer a very vast area of land. If you want to see a bigger picture of this map, here is where the Assyrians actually are able to conquer. As you can see, they have the city of Ashur, they have Nineveh, they have Babylonia is in here. They are able to conquer a vast amount of people. So the Assyrians are kind of known for their military rule. They're known for their military strength. And the Assyrians used many different forms of technology and war tools in order to advance themselves militarily. They used iron technology, they had iron tools, iron weapons, which we talked about. The early Mesopotamians and the Sumerians used bronze. The Assyrians kind of started to use iron, and that was a stronger metal. They also used padded shields for protection, and they also used chariots. And so the use of chariots really helped them to have kind of a leg up on their competition because they could shoot arrows from their chariots while they were moving. They used really strong military strategy. They would oftentimes bridge rivers to cross them, and they would dig out city walls. We talked about in class how the Mesopotamian cultures and the Sumerians had city walls because they didn't have those natural barriers, so they had to have them for protection. But the Assyrians were able to dig out the bottoms of the city walls so that they would become weak and fall, and they could go in and invade these different cities. The Assyrians had very, very no mercy type war tactics. They did not take mercy on their captives. They oftentimes would enslave, kill, behead their captives. A lot of times their captives were forced to settle as exiles. And we're going to see that these tactics, these no mercy, brutal tactics actually sort of backfire on the Assyrians. Their subjects are not as pleased with them as they would if they were more tolerant. So the Assyrians kind of had a very brutal military persona, and this is reflected, we'll see, in their culture, in their art, in all of their, in the entire encompassing of their civilization. The Assyrians are able to build a very vast empire. They're able to defeat the Syrians. They're able to go in and take land of Palestine as well as Babylonia. And like I said, you can go back to that map and see that vast area that they were able to cover. But this was about 850 to 650 BCE. Under King Ashurbanipal, they're able to just have a huge, vast land that they are in control of. Like I said, their empire reaches into Egypt and Anatolia, and so they really have a large amount of land. This area includes a lot of big hubs of civilization. They have Babylon, they have their city of Nineveh, they have the Egypt, some just major centers of civilization that kind of boost the economy and the worth of their empire. The Assyrians go on, they add more territory, and the way they're able to do that and the way they're able to maintain their empire is they charge taxes and tributes to those conquered peoples. And a tribute is just kind of like a payment that's kind of done as a sign of submission, showing that those people do submit themselves to the Assyrians, and that in hopes that they will not be further attacked by them. So the Assyrians expected their conquered peoples to pay them tributes. And if these tributes went unpaid, the Assyrians would come in and destroy cities and take over. So many people were often afraid to not pay those tributes. The Assyrians were great builders. They had many advanced cities. Like I said, their most advanced city was Nineveh, and Assur was another advanced city. But Nineveh is a very famous advanced city because it has a vast amount of libraries. It had many written works, including the Epic of Gilgamesh was there at the libraries at Nineveh. But they had several dictionaries, several written records were found at the libraries at Nineveh. So finding these libraries and the maintenance of these libraries actually made it easy to translate many of the Mesopotamian languages. So the Assyrians did have a complex and advanced culture at the city of Nineveh, and so that shows that they did have advanced cities. And as we've talked about, that's a characteristic of civilization. Also, their art was very depictive of war scenes, victory scenes, anything having to do with being a dominant force. The Assyrian art reflected it. And I know this isn't a great picture, but you can see this is just a piece of Assyrian art where it shows war and dominance and victory. And you can just see how reflective that theme of military and dominance is in their society and in their culture. So if you would like, you can even Google Assyrian art and you will find many of these pictures that depict battle scenes and conquering scenes and a lot of scenes that have to do with lions. So the Assyrians were very wrapped up in warlike military in their culture. The empire does eventually collapse about 612 BCE. The Assyrian Empire falls. And this is just kind of a combination between the internal unrest from their subjects as well as external forces. A lot of times the conquered peoples of the Assyrians were not pleased with being conquered by the Assyrians, so they would rebel, and that would cause kind of an administrative challenge to running their empire. Also, outside invasions come in and they threaten the empire. So the Medes and the Chaldeans are able to destroy and burn the city of Nineveh, and the Chaldeans, they eventually become the Babylonians. The Chaldeans set up their capital at Babylon, and the Babylonian Empire is actually restored. So King Nebuchadnezzar, he restores the Babylonian Empire, and he actually creates a very, very lavish and wealthy city at Babylon. And a lot of times this Chaldean age of Babylon is known as the New Babylonian Empire or the Chaldean Empire. But King Nebuchadnezzar was kind of known for creating a very lavish and wealth at his city of Babylon. His palace was famous for the hanging gardens. This legend is that Nebuchadnezzar's wife was longing for a flowering shrub from her homeland, so Nebuchadnezzar had them planted in the terraces above the city walls, and these hanging gardens kind of become a symbol of Babylon for ages to come. There also was a 7-tiered ziggurat in the city of Babylon. This was a place where priests would go, and they recorded, they kept records of astronomy, planet formations, and other advances in science. So that was another part of the city that was very advanced. This Babylon actually ends up falling about the time of Nebuchadnezzar's death. So it kind of shows you how Nebuchadnezzar ran his empire, however, with all these luxuries. Here is a picture of what the hanging gardens might look like. Obviously, there's no direct photographs of them, but if you want to Google that again, that's a really cool thing to look at. You can see some different pictures of the hanging gardens and what they might have looked like in the city of Babylon. Okay, moving on to the next people we are going to discuss. As you can tell, this is an even larger, vaster empire that stretches, and this is the Persian Empire. And the Persians were a people that lived, actually the Medes and the Persians, they were a people, they lived in the Middle East at about modern-day Iran, where the Iranian plateau and between the Caspian Sea. So they lived kind of right here. And Cyrus the Great is given credit for uniting the Medes and the Persians and then expanding Persia's territory by conquering all of this land to the Indus River Valley in the east and all the way up into Anatolia, almost into Greece, and down into Egypt. So you can tell this is just a huge area of land that the Persians are able to cover. Cyrus actually does not conquer all of the territory. He is just given credit for conquering the territory off into the east, and his bloodlines or his dynasty, his sons, take on and end up expanding Persia into this empire. And we'll talk about that. So Cyrus the Great, like I said, about 550 BC, he is given credit for the conquest that unifies the Persian Empire, and his conquest spans over about 2,000 miles. Cyrus had a very interesting method of governing. He was a very tolerant man. He was tolerant of his conquests. He never wanted to disrespect the religion or the culture of any of the people that he went to conquer, which is obviously different than the Assyrians because they were more brutal. But Cyrus actually, he felt that that was more tactful to be respectful, and that was how he was actually able to conquer and cover a vast amount of area. But Cyrus dies in 530 BC, and his son Cambyses takes over. And Cambyses he is given credit for extending Persia into Egypt. But he is different than his father. He actually does not practice the tolerance that Cyrus the Great did, and he scorns the religion and burns idols, and he does not show the Egyptians the respect that Cyrus the Great probably would have expected to his conquered peoples. After Cambyses, the next ruler, Darius, is a very famous ruler. Darius actually is kind of given credit for doing lots of administrative things to the Persian Empire that make it run efficiently and helps it to grow into the great power that it was. The first thing Darius does is he unifies the Persian Empire by building roads. And the most famous road is the Royal Road, and it was actually about 1,500 miles long, and it had about 100 stations holding fresh horses, so people would exchange their horses at these stations so things could run a lot more efficiently. The Royal Road actually serves as a unifying factor in the Persian Empire. They kind of foster this feeling of unity, so people could communicate much quicker, and it facilitated trade. But the Royal Road was a very famous part of the Persian Empire that kind of serves as this unifying factor to unify all of these different parts across this vast land. Also, Darius splits the Persian Empire up into provinces, and these provinces were governed by satraps, which were local governors. These provinces, they collected tributes on the provinces. We talked about tributes earlier, and they collected taxes. But these provinces were actually able to profit from trade. So the trading, the trading helped these provinces to gain wealth. But that was just something Darius did, splitting them into provinces that helped to govern and keep the Persian Empire governing efficiently. Another thing that Darius did was he encouraged the use of coins. So he encouraged the circulation of coined money, and this actually improved trade throughout the entire empire. It kind of switched Persia from a trading or a bartering economy to a money economy. And so those different things that Darius did really helped the efficiency and the strength of the Persian Empire. So by the end, Persia extended from the Nile to the Indus River. So almost, not including China, but almost the three river valley civilizations that we talked about, or we talked about four, but it encompasses 3 of the 4 river valley civilizations that we talked about into one large empire. And like I said, he controls this land by splitting them into provinces and collecting tributes. I'm going to return to this map just to show you that this red line right here is the Royal Road. So it kind of gives you an idea how this Royal Road stretched and was able to unify the Persian Empire. Discuss the religion that was practiced throughout the Persian Empire. Actually, before about 570 BC, The Persians were polytheistic, and we know that polytheistic means they worshipped many gods. So the Persians were actually polytheistic, but that changes, like I said, in 570 BC with the introduction of Zoroastrianism. And Zoroastrianism was introduced by a religious leader named Zoroaster. And Zoroastrianism teaches that there are two gods in battle for a person's soul, and the entire universe is the battleground. And there is the God of truth, light, and goodness, or Ahura Mazda, or the God of darkness and evil, Ahriman. And these two gods were at a war with one person's soul. And dependent on which god wins out was dependent on your fate, or a person's fate. These two forces fought for the possession of a person's soul. So if the God of truth, light, and goodness comes out and a person lives a good life, they will eventually go to heaven. While if the God of darkness and evil wins out, the person would be doomed to a harsh underworld. So that was the Persian religion. That was the religion that was practiced throughout the Persian Empire, and we're going to discuss how this religion affects and impacts other religions and how it mixes with other religions throughout this course. So it's important that you guys understand that this was just the religion of the Persian Empire, and we're going to talk about more religions as we discuss more civilizations. That is all for the notes today. If you have questions, please feel free to come by and see me, and I will see you guys next time we have class.